me know when you're ready. So my last year here at University of St. Joseph's, I was interning at Rockville High School in Vernon, Connecticut. I was responsible for a portion of the adolescents there who were identified in the LGBT community. I was the advisor for the Gender Sexuality Alliance there, as well as the advisor of the Substance Abuse Club. And a lot of the substance abuse and gender identity went hand in hand, as well as sexual orientation, because of the adversity that these students faced in the public education setting. With that being said, I really wanted to work on how can I eliminate bullying, but also promote transgender inclusion. So the problem practices that I focused on for this capstone would be bullying, which, it is a form of youth violence. And clearly a form of youth violence disrupts, the learning environment. It's detrimental to kids' health, their education, and believe it or not, the relationship between bullying and suicidality is really well established. So that also is an increase for the suicidality and the number of suicides that either youth commit or attempt, especially in the LGBT community, which I'll go on forward in a little bit. According to the Centers of Disease Control, bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior. It can be done by a certain youth or a group of youth, and it involves an observed or perceived power struggle. A lot of people say it's about gaining power and being stronger than and better than. And like I said, the power imbalance, and it's repeated multiple times or highly likely to be repeated. So highly likely to be repeated is something that a lot of people in their bullying statute at school and in their policy, they don't have. If they're like, so how many times did this kid do X, Y, and Z to you? And they say, well, just this once. Like, well, it was an isolated form of violence. It wasn't bullying because it wasn't repeated. Well, I'm sorry, when you're in the LGBTQ community, you are going to be a target of violence by multiple people, and it doesn't matter how many times you are discriminated against. That is bullying, that is violence, and we don't need that in the community. So transgender victimization, they are the most victimized students in the US right now and across the country. Believe it or not, LGBT youth, especially transgender youth, make up 30% of all youth suicides, and the LGBT population is about 30% of the youth. However, the transgender youth are only 10%, and that's what makes up that 30%. And believe it or not, there are a lot of mental illness and suicide rates, but also homicidal rates. 87% of all school shootings are a result of the victim trying to seek revenge of the bully. And believe it or not, it's with those people who are in the marginalized communities. So they look at people of color, people who have mental illness, people who are in the LGBT community, or people who have different religions. They're being targeted, so they're going to seek revenge. So they're saying, these people can't, be around guns. These people are the ones with the issues. But in reality, they're just seeking revenge, and they're too afraid to stand up and let their identities be known because they're afraid of the repercussions that would happen. So that's really how we had to look at this portion of research and say, so we have all this knowledge, what can we do? And as it is, people in the LGBT community are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide and 25% more likely to be bullied on a daily basis. 160,000 students on a daily basis miss school in fear of being bullied. And that's a lot. And that goes to show with, people who are transgender, they're being bullied at amounts far exceeding their peers, which equals to the 3 times more likely to be depressed. It's equal to the anxiety, the self-hatred that they have. It's also resulting in an elevated absenteeism, decline in social skills, as well as the academic progress. It's also declining because they do not, in fact, want to go to school. They are avoiding school at all costs. So one law that I actually found in 2016, which I'm actually ashamed of, as somebody who is in the LGBT community, I am in fact an open trans man. Public Act number 11-55 was founded October 1st, 2011. How is it that someone in Connecticut just found it in 2016? I was the first to propose this to Rockville High School. And because of my efforts and my advocacy work, I was able to watch 6 seniors walk across that stage with their chosen name and their gender on their diploma. They only had to get permission from one parent. It didn't have to be legal, because it is something, if a parent has to notarize it, get it notarized saying that they allow this thing to happen as their guardian, as their conservator, it is a legal document. So it requires public schools to be open to all children and give them equal opportunities to participate in all school activities, programs, and courses of study without discrimination on account of gender identity or expression. If they don't do so, it is a Class D felony. So we were all committing acts of this felony without knowing because of the lack of education and the lack of advertisement, for instance, that we have for this LGBT community. It is frowned upon, so why are we gonna push it out there and make it known? Why are we gonna educate the general population on these marginalized communities? Oh, because they don't matter. That's what they're saying. So preferred name and gender marker can be on all public records as long as it's affirmed by one parent, and the legal change is not required. To get a legal name change, it's almost $1,000 after you get the gender marker changed, all the counseling done, getting the name changed, paying for the fees, the court fees, getting the license changed. And you have to do the name before you can do the gender marker. So that's $60 a piece just for a piece of plastic. And also the Connecticut Safe School Coalition says that we need more teacher education and we need to be able to promote restrooms, locker rooms, and dress codes in coordinates of their identity. As long as you identify as male, you are allowed to use the male restroom. You are allowed to get dressed in the male's locker room, and you are allowed to wear that dress code. And a lot of students don't realize that. This is to best provide an affirming learning environment that is crucial to have our future generations succeed in life. They are the future of today. They are the future of this country. But if they can't succeed in academics and thrive where they're best knowing where their knowledge is, how are we gonna rely on their work in the future? And it's essential for all schools to recognize and support this because it shows that we in fact are welcoming and affirming. So anti-bullying campaigns are obviously common throughout the state. It is required for every school in the nation to have a bullying policy, whether it's at the school level, state level, or nationwide. Dr. Dan Olis, he's from Norway, he's a Norwegian research professor, and he founded the School-Wide Foundation. Through his mission statement, his code of conduct, bullying policy, elevated presence of school personnel, effective communication with parents, maybe even coaches, teachers, school bus drivers, that we are able to reduce 50% of all bullying. And after he put in place his research and what he thought would work, he was right. 50% of all bullying, the reduction rate went down. So he also proposed that we should have a school safety team. So that's having school social work staff, students within the school who are considered to be the most influential to get that footwork going. And let's have a diverse student population be included in that. The more diverse the students who are involved are, the more that these students are gonna see, wow, people from all walks of life are able to support me and affirm me and welcome me aboard to this society. And they'll be more able to join and grow and learn with others. So, if we have a jock who knows, they could be in the LGBT community, but they're so held within inside. But if they see their peers or their coach part of this team, maybe they'll join in. It only takes one person to start a change. So school suspension is usually, what the disciplinary approach is. 90% of all schools use this approach, zero tolerance policy. So it's an operating procedure with 109,000 public schools since 1994. So if you bully, all right, they're suspended. Well, they assume, based on that removing the students who engage in the bad behavior, the disruption behavior, that's what it is. Bullying is a disruption. This violence is not welcome in there. You are disrupting someone's ability to learn and someone's presence in that school building. So they believe, okay, we'll just remove them. It's gonna create an improved environment for them. Well, ultimately, is that true? Because they're just gonna seek revenge. Oh, you wanna take me out? Okay, then I'm not gonna go to school. I'm just gonna bully them online. Or, okay, I'm just not gonna go to class. What are you gonna do now? You're not letting me go to that class. So are you really gonna punish me? And also avoiding school. Just as the people who are being bullied, I don't wanna go. I'm being bullied. So the bully's gonna go, I'm not gonna go because they don't want me there anyway. So they're gonna come up with excuses not to go. So really, what is that doing? It's increasing dropout rates. It's increasing bullying rates. It's an over-reliance on this suspension policy, and that's directly correlated to an escalation, like I said, in dropouts, and grade retention, so staying back. involvement with the juvenile justice system. So it's creating this environment where students are being thrown into legal systems way too early for things that could be so minuscule and preventive. They're reacting, they're not preventing. So that is really why, we need an environment where students can thrive academically, okay, not be seen as, victims or be seen as bullies, because in reality, people can change, and who knows, maybe them targeting these other students is because it's change or difference, diversity, and they're not used to that. It's what they're learning and how they're raised, so if they see something different, they're automatically going to attack it. Because a lot of the time, change, diversity, it's discomforting to those who are exposed to it when they're not used to it on a daily basis. So from what I researched, there is a literature gap. There is a lack of LGBTQ inclusive education and bullying interventions. Bullying, it is complex, it's multi-systemic, and you really need to have a whole school involved. You need the community, you need to go from the core of the school and bring it out into your neighborhoods, into your regions where you go to education, whether that's the school board of superintendents, whether that's the administration team, whether that's the PTO, okay, whether that's the school bus drivers, whether that's the crosswalk person, whether that's coaches, whoever it may be, okay? We need to let everybody know that we need to tackle this together. The intervention techniques and warning signs are unknown. So teachers could be in the hallways and they're seeing bullying and all these targeting towards the LGBT community right before their eyes, but they don't know it. They don't see it, so they don't address it. They don't put an end to it. So they're getting away with this discrimination day in and day out. They also don't know the warning signs of suicide or depression, right? So these kids that are being targeted, they're walking with their heads down, or they're isolating themselves from other peers. But the teachers are blind to it because they aren't educated. They don't know what to look for. And also other kids. How can they be allies, right, if they don't know how to report or they don't know what to look for? So here we are just being bystanders, letting it go and not interrupting the violence, not putting a stop to it. So most cases of bullying, they go unreported because students, parents, teachers, they don't know who to report it to, where to report it, or how. And also, like I said before, the fear of repercussion. Well, I'll be a tattletale, I'll get bullied as well. So here's where I came up with my practice innovation called Project Pride. So I was like, okay, let's get this Public Act number 11-55, let's get it known. So the State Board of Connecticut, the social workers are also invited, the superintendents of all schools will attend this workshop and learn about, the work and the law and what goes into it and why it's a class D felony. They will also be given information on what is suicide, what is homicide, what is bullying, what is transgender victimization. They're gonna be given articles, case studies, key terms, and they're gonna learn and they're gonna enrich their knowledge of what it is that happens in their schools, what it is that they're letting occur and how they can stop it. And they will be taking pre and post surveys. So are you willing to address, bullying? Are you willing to serve someone in the transgender community? Are you willing to serve somebody or teach somebody who, in fact, identifies as an ally with someone who is transgender? Do you know what bullying is? What are the types of bullying? How often does bullying happen? Do you know how to access your school's bullying policy? So those are questions that they're gonna have to answer pre and post to see how much did they really take away from this workshop. Speak is actually something that I have founded, and I do speak at a variety of high schools in the state of Connecticut. SPEAK stands for Supporting, Protecting, Educating America's Kids. It's an anti-bullying campaign that's there to support youth, LGBT youth, in this childhood bullying epidemic. It's a day-long assembly, and I work with a school up to 3 months prior to that day-long assembly. And I take a group of kids who said, okay, I'll share my story. And I said, okay, but what is your story? Are you the bully? Are you the victim? Are you the bystander? Are you an ally? Are you a parent to a kid who's been bullied? What are you? Are you a safe person? How are they gonna know? So I'll take usually the upperclassmen in the school. It's usually from the high school level. I have spoke at Parish Hill High, Lyman Memorial High, Ram High, West Hartford High. I've spoken at Glastonbury High. I've spoken to Rockville High, Putnam High School also with like to have me out there, Woodstock Academy, because that's where I'm serving right now. That's the community I'm working with. So I'll take the upperclassmen, and I've had jocks tell their story about how they bullied their best friend's little sister so bad because in fact she was a quote unquote dyke where she committed suicide. And he got up on stage and said, I did that, and how it made him feel to this day. And how he no longer was able to be on that football team because nobody wanted him as their quarterback. So it goes to show, and that's powerful. And kids aren't gonna listen to that unless it's a face they see in the hallway or a kid that they admire, the kid that really moves that room. Okay, I've been there. I was in fact, one of those kids on a panel when I was a junior in high school. I took it off a spin of Power of Words, which was founded by a group of guidance counselors who worked at RAM, who said, how can we go about this? So the Anti-Defamation League, they took research and they did trainings and they came up with their own intervention. And I took a spin on it and said, let's narrow it down. This is bullying as a whole, but let's get into the core of these LGBT students who are not supported, who are not given the time of day. And I've had teachers go up there and talk about their children who have been bullied. I have kids who say, I was a bystander, I didn't say anything. And, that was the last time I ever saw that kid. There are kids who said, I was an ally, and because of that, I gained a friend that day. If I wasn't there to say, hey, stop, maybe I wouldn't have that friend. So it really is powerful to hear it from those students. They also hear, they listen to a documentary about a kid who was in his middle school in New York, who in fact hung himself in his middle school bathroom stall and wrote a letter saying, these are to the bullies. I was too afraid to stand up. I tried to say something, no one listened. So it's really moving, and they hear, and we do video clips of every student pretty much in that school system. And we ask them, do you know what bullying is? Do you see bullying day to day? What is bullying? They define respect in acronyms. So R could be, responsibility. E could be empathy. S could be support. P could be pride. And the list goes on. So it's really a school-wide approach, and seeing the day-to-day students actually start this movement and continue to develop it and actually implement it within their school body. It has been known that my campaign that I do has ended bullying and changed the climate of Lyman Memorial High School by 70%. Their reduction rate went to 70%. There are kids who have thrived, and they are one of the top high schools now in Connecticut who support LGBTQ students who are affiliated with the True Colors Conference. So it just takes one person to share their story, and it moves a room. So the Quest to End Bullying webinar is really, a way to drive away from this no tolerance policy. So what can we do? How can we be able to have these, students learn about what they're doing without being taken out of the educational environment, without actually losing out on, academic life. So it's a software program that I designed based off Build Respect, Stop Bullying program. So there are 3 sections to this. So it would be the first one, it's really they're just learning about the rules and the laws about bullying and how it is in fact a crime. They're learning definitions, key concepts about bullying, the types of bullying. So really all the, the research about it, right? And that's one 60-minute interval. And they do this during study halls, at home, maybe after school, maybe, a time where they don't have to miss out on classwork. They can do it at lunch if they wanted, but they are to complete all 3. The second one would be case studies. They have to go through case studies and then write a paragraph or 2 per study on how they would intervene or what they learned from that, and really what was being said. What was this case study on? Was it a bystander's case study? Was it an ally? Was it a bully? Was it a victim? Who was it? Was it a professional? Was it an educator? And from there, they would have to educate in ways to implement or change the culture around that case study. The third one really is, it's a warning sign to, all the suicides and the homicides and the warning signs of bullying. And then after they see that, they do have to go in and take a test and see, have they retained any of that information? And of that information, what is their willingness of change? So it's really on the theory of change and strengths-based perspective. Is this education, is the content in this webinar being retained? And, you know, if they have multiple offenses of bullying, okay, maybe they keep bullying after this. All right, so community service hours. Let them do volunteer hours. Let them, you know, learn to address their own biases in a way that they're actually learning and not being disciplined. So maybe going to counseling, you know, so on and so forth. Group counseling, maybe having to attend, you know, a GSA after school and getting, you know, support and being welcomed and affirmed in a community that they can realize are just individuals with the same dreams and wishes and potentials of everyone else. So that is, you know, the micro, meso, macro, the state, school, state, and then nationwide. So bullying obviously is detrimental to learning environments and mental health. Macro, meso, micro level bullying interventions must incite the safety and well-being of all students. And Project Pride will allow Connecticut Public Schools to adopt a safe, welcoming setting for all students, especially those identifying as transgender and their allies. Those are my references.
Questions for Kyle?
So, for your process of gathering, the information and such, did you only utilize resources from the school library, or did you access, like, how did you,
So I actually conducted a survey via SurveyMonkey, and I got the students who were involved in the Gender Sexuality Alliance at school, whether they were, you know, identified as LGBTQ and so forth, or were they allies. And they were able to answer questions such as, where does bullying take place? How often do you see bullying? How do you identify? Do you know anybody in the LGBT community? Do you know anybody who's been bullied? Have you been bullied? Stuff like that. And actually some of my main statistics that I gathered from this and I actually reported to the school resource office was that, you know, 92% reported that they didn't know how to go online and access their anonymous bullying fund. 92% of the students. 97% said they didn't know that there was a gender neutral bathroom in their school. And 78% did not know how to define bullying. And of all those, only 3 students opted out because they didn't want their parents to know that they were part of the Gender Sexuality Alliance. So in order to get permission, I had to have their parents sign a permission slip, and they didn't want their parents to know that they affiliated with LGBTQ Club, so they did not answer.
what was your sample size?
My sample size was 72. Rockville High has one of the largest GSAs in the state of Connecticut, yeah.
Kyle, so that survey data helped to define your problem of practice.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the question was asking maybe more around your literature review sources.
So what I did was I looked at a bunch of studies that were conducted through True Colors, through GLSEN, so the Trevor Project. And I looked at a lot of how they defined what suicide was, what bullying was, what were their implementations, like what have they done and what has worked and what hasn't. And from there I realized there still is that lack of knowledge. And it was very hard to find research articles even on, you know, databases like EBSCO, because when you narrow it down and you make it specific, you are very limited on the amount of LGBT sources that are out there.
Where did you go to find the Policy Act number 11 through, what's the other number?
11-55.
11-55.
So I went to the Connecticut State website and looked at a bunch of their documents, their PDFs, and I just kept clicking and I typed in transgender. There was nothing. I typed in gender, and that's when I found this. It was underneath, so it was Title IX, State of Connecticut's Title IX, and there was a couple other, you know, sites, and then I said, what is this PDF document? And I clicked it, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Smallest font, buried under a lot of other policies, because they didn't want it to be
Did you learn more, subsequently, have you learned more about the history of that policy and its sponsors?
So a lot of its sponsors are, True Colors, Glisten, those companies that have put forth, the funding and the knowledge towards it. And I found out that, a lot of it was moved, in fact, by coaches too, who, a lot of the academics, yes, they're supporting it, but a lot of the sports, because the sports are really where those kids, they connect. And they saw that most of the incidents were happening on the field or in the locker room. So when a bunch of coaches got together and said, what can we do to address this? That's when they took it to a bigger level. Which, it moved me. Sports, who would have thought that a group of coaches would have been like, okay, let's do something about this.
Kyle, from the EBSCO sources, do you recall finding any evidence of interventions that had some success?
One of the prominent ones was the Build Respect, Stop Bullying. It said that, it was a great source for teachers to be educated on really what the warning signs were. So it was about a 67% success rate. And I said, well, if teachers can learn, why not adapt it so that the students can also learn? And the students can also access this online, so it's accessible to them, and they can do it when they're not, missing class time. They can do it in the comfort of their own home if they had to, with their own tablet or on their phone. They're at least educating themselves. And I also saw that, with the bullying policies, a lot of them say that they're effective, and Dan Olis definitely started the ground running with anti-bullying policies. And I saw that he said, his reduction rate was 50%. That's great, but bullying has then become so complex and so diverse, and it's definitely taken various forms. Cyberbullying is definitely a big one, where they're behind the screen and they're just typing away these words that they can't see how the others look or feel or how they're responding to it. Putting your words in caps can only do so much. So when I saw that, that's 50% back then, what is it now? And there was no data on anything evident. So that's when I took, looked at my problem of practice and saw all the statistics on the transgender, suicide attempts, and how, many cases of victimization were out there via the Trevor Project, or even, and really where I found it was sources back in California about case studies out west. Because up here, they're really, it's a lot more rural, and it's harder to find those resources for the LGBT teens.
Other questions?
Earlier on, you stated that not a lot of training has been done with educators.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any plans to propose training for educators? So for instance, like you were working at Rockville, was it?
Yes.
So educators usually have like
Professional.
PDs.
Yes.
Professional PDs.
So what I would do is I would go in. I have spoke at professional development days at schools across the state, and I've worked. That's part of getting my assembly in places. I have to, propose it to the administration and then propose it to the teachers. And if they're all on board as a whole school, then I go in and I start working with the students. But just speaking to a room of teachers and administrators, you will see how moved they are by the statistics and what they've seen, and also my experience in speaking to other schools, and also the references that I have. I've had some schools call other school principals, hey, did this guy come speak at your school, and what were you moved by it, what happened? And just, all it takes is one person. You have to inspire one person, and then the work keeps going. And that's part of social work. If we advocate on one behalf, if we change one life, that's okay. It may not be every single client we see, but we change one life, and in that, form of change, it evolves something else.
I did my undergrad internship with the truancy officer at Vernon Center Middle School.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Delia?
Yes.
Yeah, love him. And
He's a funny guy.
yeah, he's great. Have you ever thought about like working with like attendance officers and stuff, like? And
So,
collaborating with
yeah,
them?
when I worked at Rockville High for my internship, the student resource officer was very in tune with what I was doing. He wanted all my research. He went through the surveys with me. And he realized, he's like, wow, bullying is more of a problem than I thought. He's like, we have the whole gang affiliation out in Rockville. That's how they see bullying, is all these kids saying they're in gangs, ganging up on each other, or that physical violence. But when he looked at the attendance rate and he saw what students they were and how they identified, and, a lot of the kids that were on the board of going to, the juvenile review for attendance, they were in the GSA. So he was like, there's the correlation right there. And as, we became more welcoming, Rockville High put a rainbow flag outside next, on a different flagpole. It wasn't the same one, but a different flagpole, and the attendance rates just went right up. To show that we're there and implementing it. Just that one sign, putting safe space stickers, in classrooms, or having teachers wear rainbow ribbons on their lanyards, or just wearing a sticker on their badge saying, hey, I am an ally, I am someone you can talk to. When they see that there's safety around them, and they don't really have to seek it, and they just see it, it's right in front of their face, you realize how more safe they become. And a lot of the kids, they felt the safest at school, whether it be in the social work office or at the GSA, because they in fact were afraid to tell their parents what they were internally struggling with.
Can you talk about the process of writing up the literature review and the practice innovation component of your capstone?
So I read various articles and resources, and I think I read up to about 100 sources, and I had to really vary it down to what was the more based on the dates. And I think the latest date I had on here was 1999, but the rest were 2007 was the latest one. Then I had 2016, 2013, 2017. So really up-to-date literature is really what I used. And I found that a lot of those articles that had the same date range, a lot of them were in agreement with each other. And so I went off of them and found different theories and different research studies within them and said, okay, this is what they're finding. This is really around the time in the millennial generations that I'm working with. So I had to go through dates. I had to go through, what studies, how successful were they? I had to read through a lot of, the case populations that they used. How many were transgender versus how many were, heterosexual, how many were cisgender. So I had to go through all of that to really narrow it down. And it's a lot of work, I did a lot of highlighting, a lot of coding. I would cut certain quotes out and put them in paragraphs and sort them where I would want them in my essay, and how I would have that guide my approach and actually, propose that in fact, this is a literature that stands, but this is where we have a gap, and this is what needs to be, addressed. So it was the process of elimination is definitely something that I had to use. Yes.
Going back to her question, so you said you read like 100 articles. I know
Yeah.
you were just saying that, right? But when you got stuck with the articles here, did you find other articles? Was it just online? Was it recommendations from?
So I did go online, and I used web sources that were like .org, .gov. I stayed away from the .coms because I wanted to look at the validity and the reliability of the sources. I also went to libraries and looked at books. Books were huge. Dr. Neely's book on transgender youth was definitely something that I looked at, and some of the things that he proposed, and I helped that guide my research and my writing as well as my practice innovation. It's just looking at what the experts out there have already done, and what can you also take, their approach, but also put your own twist on it to address the gap in literature. Yes.
Can you talk about your process with developing your innovation, and how that was for you as far as like narrowing down what exactly it was? Because I'm sure that once you did your research and realized the gap, it may be that there was a lot of different ideas bouncing around. So how did you
Absolutely.
narrow it down?
So once I narrowed down my sources, I got my literature review out there, and to think about, so what am I gonna do with all this knowledge? I know there's a gap, but how am I gonna close that gap? So I actually sat down with Professor DeSuze and I said, this is my dream and this is what I want to happen. And he was like, well, let's look at the different levels, the different approaches that you can take. So at the different levels of intervention, so micro, meso, macro. I know not all of you are going to do all 3 tiers, But at each, I said, this is a complex, holistic approach. How am I gonna take something that's such a huge approach and narrow it down? So I started, at the macro level first, and then I went to the meso, and then I really went down to the individual. So what can we do at those different levels to guide, my research? But you have to collaborate, you have to get, recommendations from experts who have done research. It doesn't matter if they've done research for LGBT studies, but who have done research in the field and what they have encountered and what, obstacles that they've run into to help you guide your approach and what, to get kind of a realistic point of view of what could happen when you're out in that field and what could happen when you're proposing something. It takes a lot of work, but if you have the right guidance and the patience and you collaborate with an expert source, you are in good hands.
Kyle, can you talk about what working on this capstone has meant for you as you completed your MSW and began your career?
Mm-hmm.
I know there was some bumps
Yes,
along the way
definitely.
that have brought you to where you are now.
Mhm.
But could you talk a little bit about how this capstone has been a foundation for you to launch your career?
Absolutely. So believe it or not, I actually edited this capstone PowerPoint and essay at 3 o'clock this afternoon. I had to change my name on that. I was Kylie Smith. I have since come out, I knew internally who I was, and that's why I had such a drive and such a passion. But I had to realize and do my own research that there were supports in place. I'm telling kids on a day-to-day basis that it's okay to be who you are. Why can't I do it myself? So I then, I went through all that counseling that I was doing for these kids. I went through all the process of transitioning medically, socially. And from there I was like, okay, I can do this. So what am I gonna do? If I can do it for myself, how am I gonna help those lives of others, as an open trans man, which gives me more power, more knowledge. And I realized that I wanna work with teens. So I said, okay, I'm gonna be in schools. And being in schools are great, but I really needed to look at a more clinical based, placement. So I went to ICAPS and I was a clinician for ICAPS, being in the home and seeing different families and different population of students. But I realized I don't wanna be in the homes, it's uncomfortable. I'm used to being in a school. I'm used to having my own office, not being in their home. And there are some things that I saw in the homes that I was like, whoa, being in the home is not for me. So I said, okay, I gotta be patient. There were bumps in the road. I lost my father. I lost my family because I transitioned. So I've been doing this a lot on my own. And then, I had a peer of mine, a colleague from Eastern. She called me and she said, I know, you're working at a bachelor level with your master's. What are you doing? And she sent me an Indeed link to Justice Resource Institute. And they had a spot for a clinician who works in a residential, the congregate care. So at my residential, we have the dormitories, we have the schoolhouse where they go and they receive their special education services. All of them receive special ed services. Most of them under the specification of emotional disturbance because of their trauma. A lot of them have, high IQs, they're smart people, but their trauma has limited their ability to focus and concentrate because ADHD and ADD, they mimic PTSD, believe it or not. And the medications are so hard to balance out. You could be on a lot of ADHD medication, but it's actually more of a trigger to your trauma, your traumatic response, and how you are regulating yourself. So regulation and being attuned to your own self, your caregiver affect. So from there, I am doing the work, and as kids came to me saying, I am transgender, I am this, I am that, I was really the only one who had knowledge due to my personal experience and my research that I'd done. So now at the Justice Resource Institute, we just recently opened up a group home that is for transgender individuals. We have opened up a student-run gender sexuality organization at our residential program. So students come together from all walks of life, all different walks of trauma, and they're focusing on one thing, and that's being included in something. So giving them, a support network, because believe it or not, we are their family, we are their home. That's where they go to school, that's where they live. And professionally, I have expanded my knowledge and, my work, speaking at the NASW conferences, speaking at True Colors, many years in a row speaking at different schools. And it, you know, it just goes to show that if you're passionate about something and you do the knowledge and all the research and you retain that and you work on it day by day, you become an expert. When you're an expert in something that you love, you never get sick of it. You know, I'm learning about myself and my own journey, and I'm learning about, you know, society as a whole and the lens that they look through when they look at the transgender population. What is it that I can do as someone who's also, you know, walking pretty much hand in hand with these students? What can I do to make a difference? And we're all social workers for a reason. We all want to be in this field for something that we're passionate about, or something that we've overcome, right? Or something that we've been affected by. So take your passion and let it drive your dream. Honestly, let it drive. Because you can burn out in this field. You know, it is common. So pick something that you are passionate about, and a day in the office to you is not work. It's about achieving your dreams.
That's a wonderful way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kyle.